How does a teenage runaway named Benjamin Franklin, who's broke, he's hungry, and he has almost no formal education, go on to becoming a best-selling writer, wealthy printer, groundbreaking inventor, and respected philosopher with skilled diplomacy abilities that help him become one of the people who found the United States, all in one lifetime, and all through the power of a pen? Well, Benjamin Franklin didn't just stumble into greatness. He built it. And today, you're going to see exactly how Franklin trained himself into a world-class polymath and how you can use the same habits to learn faster, to think deeper, and master multiple fields, even if right now you feel scattered or stuck. How do I know? I read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin when I was very young, and it influenced me deeply, and I have used a lot of these techniques. And even though I haven't gotten as far down the road as Franklin did, well, I mean, I got time to grow my hair longer and have as cool a hairdo as he did. And at the end of the day, it's about modeling what works, and success leaves clues. So stay with me to the end, because I'm going to share a Franklin-inspired habit stack I've used myself. You can start using it tonight, and it will literally rewire your brain for polymath-level thinking. But first, what is a polymath, in case you're new to that term, and what makes Franklin one? Well, this term polymath has been around for a long time, but unfortunately these days, sometimes people use it to mean someone with a lot of hobbies, and that's not Franklin. Like Thomas Jefferson and other true polymaths that I've covered before, Franklin deliberately built mastery in multiple disciplines through the power of habit, not privilege, not prodigy status. He wasn't a savant. He just had a relentless willingness to practice the right things over and over. So one of the big habits that I learned from him was reading against the clock. And Franklin worked in his brother's printing shop, and to educate himself, he'd quietly borrow books from booksellers in the evening. He would read them overnight and return them before anyone noticed. And you have to think about this in the context of the time. I mean, books were very, very expensive, and to just borrow them wasn't done. You had to pay to borrow books at that time until Franklin changed how libraries worked and created the first lending library. But that was a bit of a scoundrel kind of thing to do. And he wrote, "Often I sat up in my room reading the greatest part of the night, lest the book should be missed or wanted." And he would then get it back so no one would notice. And this wasn't leisure reading. It was training under pressure, sharpening focus and memory. Now, there's a couple other ways that he sharpened his focus and memory that we'll talk about in a minute. But think about the deadline and its power. I've done this myself for years. I had to sometimes, because in my university career, you just have assignments that are due, and so you have to basically manage your time in a way to meet those deadlines. But I learned from Franklin that you can make your mind grip onto the material by always reading to a deadline and choosing books that really matter. So what Franklin did is he chose books that were written in modern styles a lot of the time to help shape the clarity of his communication. And he kept studying that way for the rest of his life. Now, that's not at the expense of not reading older books, but he had this balance between the newest contemporary styles and a deep understanding of the ancient form of rhetoric. So this kind of pattern in his study will come up again and again, but it's the reading to the deadline that matters. So one exercise that you can do is pick a book, and this is the way that I've read for many, many years in order to have a sort of deadline of reading. Pick a book, physical book ideally, put your finger to the point that you're going to read, and then make yourself read to that point. And if you make it an hour, you make it 20 minutes, whatever it is that you choose, try to get into the habit of knowing how much you can read in certain amounts of time, and then just insert your finger in that page and read to that point. And there's a principle called interleaving. I often read 3-4 books a day, not books in their entirety, but to these points within books. That's called interleaving. And when you switch every 20 to 30 minutes and so forth, you'll actually wind up remembering more of all those books, assuming that the principle of interleaving works for you. But with some practice, it most likely will. So that's one way I've adapted that technique, and it has served me tremendously over the years. Now, another thing that Franklin used to do was read people through conversation. So it wasn't just about reading books, but it was also about being able to understand character. And he did that by picking the right conversations with the right people, because he realized that high-quality conversations can teach you more than 100 books, and often a lot faster. And speaking of high-quality conversations, if you're new here and you want more information like this, make sure to get subscribed. And for the love of memory, hit that thumbs up, because the Magnetic Memory Method mission that I am always going on about is to make everybody's memory as powerful as possible, and each individual who has a better memory helps raise all ships all around the world. So look forward to having you involved. Okay, so Franklin, he found out about better conversations, and he founded something called the Junto, which was a weekly gathering of tradesmen, writers, and thinkers who were willing to share their ideas, but not just share them willy-nilly, but to share them in a structured way. So this wasn't a social club. This was a living, breathing, learning machine. And as Franklin put it in his own words, a man wrapped up in himself makes a very small bundle. And that's what Franklin wanted to avoid. I myself want to avoid this because, networking isn't just modern career advice. For Franklin, it was an essential part of polymathy. So as part of my own polymathic practice expanding my skills, I'm creating a physical memory palace with a working bookshop in it. It's very, very difficult, but Franklin inspires me pretty much every day because I want to have books about him in there and books by him in there, but also have my own little junto where people come and we have structured conversations, because the right conversations, I believe, are indeed, like he said, worth more than 100 books sometimes. All right, so another habit, in addition to reading to a deadline, in addition to having conversations with the right people in the right structured situations, was to accumulate knowledge through questioning. So Franklin was a very opinionated person, but he knew that listening mattered more than speaking, but listening is pretty useless if you're not directing the force and the flavor of what it is that you're hearing. So Walter Isaacson, in this biography of Franklin, quotes Franklin, and he says, "Knowledge was obtained by the use of the ear rather than of the tongue." So Franklin didn't ask questions to show off how smart he was, which, is tempting to do when you're asking questions, but he asked questions in ways to refine his thinking, to challenge his biases, and to help unlock new perspectives. In a way, he reminds me of Leonardo da Vinci in that way, where da Vinci would write in his journal, "I have to go and talk to a bridge builder," or whatever the case may be, in order to really unlock the information in that person's mind. But it's not just talking to them, it's asking the right questions. And over time, questioning, and very sophisticated kinds of questioning, can become very, very automatic. And that's because procedural memory can help you turn a skill into a reflex. So make questioning your default study mode, both when you're reading and when you're having conversations, and you're going to notice that your depth of understanding multiplies. Now, the next thing that relates to the idea of having structured conversations is just setting rules and keeping to them. So the idea of reading to a deadline is a kind of rule. The idea of having a meeting that has a particular structure and sticking to that structure is a kind of rule. And Franklin had all kinds of rules. Why? Well, it's not just that you get better outcomes, but by following rules, you free the mind. You have more space. The constraint creates freedom. And Franklin wrote out 13 virtues for moral perfection, rules that were kind of like little bylaws of life. And he followed them, and he just had a clearer mind because he didn't have to remember transgressions or sins against his fellow humans, right? And that's a very, very important concept if you want to master multiple skills. If your brain is filled up with guilt, and there's many different kinds of guilt that you can rack up, you're going to have a lot of blockages, and you won't be able to focus and concentrate. And this is partly what Freud was talking about with the unconscious, is that a lot of people are held back because part of their memory is clogged up with garbage. And that garbage actually should be there because you should feel bad about those things. Anyway, this is not meant to be a lecture in psychology, but when you think about Franklin's success, those rules for moral virtue probably are a huge part of his success because his brain power wasn't chewed up on dealing with his transgressions. He didn't have any to deal with. Now, he also had these bylaws in the fire brigades that he set up, and he had the rules for the junto, etc. If people broke the rules, they paid a fine. And, that might be a little bit too extreme for you, but there are a lot of people who just don't have rules, and then they get apps and so forth to make some money that they've committed into the app be sent to a charity or whatnot if they break those rules. And that's a really interesting thing to me. I've never tried that, but when I started the bookshop project, I knew that if I told people in advance that I was going to do this, that it would basically make me have a little bit of pressure to actually finish. But that was the rule. I'm going to make this public, and then I'm going to finish what I start, even though I often sometimes feel like giving up because it's so difficult, right? But it makes it visible. And that visibility has helped carry me through some moments where quitting would have been very, very easy and very tempting. But I keep moving forward no matter how long it takes, because the rule is, got to finish what I start. One of the amazing things that I learned from Franklin is to take masterful notes. Now, Franklin developed his own shorthand, and what he would do is rewrite the ideas from books in his own words, sometimes in this shorthand, but other times in a normal longhand. And then he would later challenge himself to rewrite the ideas from memory and see how close that he got. So I've done that quite a bit in the form of summaries, and even though I have never invented my own shorthand, I do have my own little note-taking system that I've worked out, often on little index cards, and I will write out what I think I remembered on those index cards and test. And it has been very, very good for not only practicing focus, but developing memory. And another thing that Franklin did that I've also adapted is he would create Socratic dialogues between personas, and he would invent these people and have them talking to each other in little dramatic plays and so forth. I remember actually having an assignment returned to me early in university, a second-year political science course, and I had a dialogue between Frank Zappa and Karl Marx, and the teacher said, no, you can't hand this in, and I had to write a formal essay. I think she was missing the mark, because when it came time to write that formal essay, I really did understand what I was talking about, because writing these dialogues and processing the information from the stuff we were studying in political science, it was active. It was transformational. I took my notes and I turned them into conversations. And it wasn't just copying down bullet points that I was never going to read again. It was actually using the tool of the stage in the mind, the theater of action, that helped me learn those principles very, very well. So what we're talking about is not just taking notes, but reformulating the notes, connecting them, and engaging the ideas very, very deeply. And that idea of having a dialogue, playing things out like it's a play on a stage or a movie in your mind, it will help consolidate the ideas, make them deeper and richer. But it's not just in the imagination. It's happening through the body, through physical writing, and also through the imagination with a sense of drama. So Franklin copied essays he admired, he rewrote them from memory, and he studied grammar and rhetoric as well in order to help him persuade and inform other people. So if you need a resource all about that, make sure that you've read Aristotle on rhetoric. There's many, many resources, but pretty much everybody points back to Aristotle, so why not start with that book? It's really, really fantastic. And when Franklin was writing letters to thinkers across Europe to get insights that he couldn't find locally, he would also study how that they responded, how they tried to persuade him using rhetorical tools. So you can't underestimate the power not just of writing, but how you write, the actual words you use. And one thing that you can do, and Franklin talked about this as an exercise, is take a sentence and try to find as many different ways that you can write that sentence as possible to formulate it in different structures. So this is something that can really improve your writing skills. And it certainly improved his, because by age 42, writing had made Franklin so wealthy that he was able to retire and focus entirely on learning, inventing, and public service, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, when it comes to how that he got retired so early, it's not just that it was writing. This is a major tip if you can work this out. He had a synergy of synced habits. So the skills and the habits weren't random. They built on themselves. So his printing business fed his publishing business, which boosted his political influence because he was actually publishing his own content. So he owned the machines that printed the material, and he owned the publications that printed the material. And this helped reinforce his scientific reputation. But because he actually owned some of the printing presses in distant regions, well, then he ultimately ended up being able to also be the person who directed the shipping or the postage and the postal system that connected everything. So he had this centripetal vision. And this idea of being a centripetal polymath comes from a book called The Polymath by Peter Burke. I highly recommend reading this. And it's the idea of stacking multiple skills together in a centripetal way in the service of a larger vision. What's the opposite of that? It would be centrifugal polymath, where you're just kind of interested in everything, and over time you, maybe not everything, but you selectively gather skills, but you're not heading towards some big goal. But in Franklin's case, he's a writer, he has ideas, and he's a publisher and a printer, so he's doing it in a way that it all points back to one central goal, hence the idea of the centripetal polymath. Now, another thing that he did in terms of making this synergistic stack of skills and habits that all point back to the same goal is that he used his time in what I guess we would call an early version of time blocking. And he actually shared a graphic of what that looked like. But the genius wasn't really in the time blocking, if you ask me. It was in the space that he left for thinking. So he would ask questions, and there'd be time to think about the answer to these questions. What good will I do today? And in the evening, what good have I done today? And having time for reflective thinking helps keep your focus aligned with your purpose. And then the activities that you're going to do on the next day stay aligned with your purpose. So this is a really, really important principle. And if you want more than just trivia in your mind in your life, and you want just more than random skills, then you want to make sure you're giving yourself a lot of time to practice reflective thinking. And if you need help with time, I've got something coming up that's going to be a deep dive into how more polymaths, philosophers, inventors, and people like myself who use the internet in the ways that I use it are able to stack these strategies and still have time for thinking, so you can think faster about what it is that you want to do and remember more. So make sure that you stick around, because I'm going to offer you an opportunity to get that in a minute. And you're also going to get early access to a very, very special training you can start today, where we'll walk through a couple more learning drills and help you customize them to your goals before this special live workshop that I'm going to be offering begins. So there's more lessons to be learned from Franklin, and one of my favorites has to do with his contributions to science. I think it's well known that he helped prove that lightning contained electricity, or is electricity. He invented the lightning rod, which allowed him to help people prevent countless fires. And then he was solving a personal problem and invented bifocal glasses. And that helped millions and millions and millions of people be able to see better. And then he charted the Gulf Stream, improving how people navigate the waters and so forth. Well, what's really, really interesting about all of that is, especially the lightning rod, is that he conducted scientific experiments. He didn't just correspond with scientists all over the place, including faraway places in Europe, but he also tried to work out how to be safe in his experiments. And I think that that's a big lesson as well. And it comes from thinking about what you're doing. So in your polymathic journey, try to think about your own safety and allow yourself to imagine all kinds of experiments, but always have some sort of due diligence where you check to make sure that what you're engaging in is actually not going to harm you. Because there are many things that could have been quite bad, including the stove ovens that Franklin worked on and so forth. But because of the level of thought that went into it, any of that risk was minimized. And you can take this notion of safety and connect it to his moral virtues and how that he built rules and stuck to them. And you see this in the influence that he has on the draft of the Declaration of Independence, the negotiation of the Treaty of Paris, and many of the ways that he served America as a cultural ambassador and then as a philanthropist who founded lending libraries, fire brigades, helping people clean the streets or making them feel like they actually wanted to have clean streets. That's got a focus on safety. And, you know, there's criticisms in our modern world about safety weakening people. And, you know, there's validity to that concern. But at the end of the day, just think about what Franklin was able to achieve by making sure he had time to think about that stuff and act upon it. He built an empire, and he wrote under so many different names, and he wrote dozens and dozens of essays that influenced so many people, and it all came from deliberate habit building and stacking skills that were strategic but had time for thought as really the ultimate habit of them all, thinking. But there's another larger lesson on top of this, and I hope that you really get this and start to put it in your own life, because I know a lot of people are held back by perfectionism or by waiting for the right conditions. Well, Franklin didn't wait for the right time. He didn't wait for the right teacher. He didn't wait for the right opportunity. If he had, history wouldn't remember him, wouldn't know him at all. His polymathy was forged, and yours can be too. So start with one habit, one question, one page in a journal, and then keep going day after day after day. Because Franklin wasn't alone. He was a founding father like Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson was also a polymath, but his learning is maybe a little bit more controversial, especially if you follow the comments in my video that I'll encourage you to watch next. But first, one more tip from Franklin that I think you're going to want to know and start using, because it's helped me tremendously over the years. But before that, if you want to be notified before I go live with the workshop where I'm going to show you how to develop your own habit stack and find time and make use of time much, much better, make sure to set the stage by getting my self-education blueprint and going through it in some detail. It has exercises that are going to help you ahead of the live workshop, and I really have enjoyed all the feedback I've gotten so far from several thousand people already. So make sure you're part of that, and you can just grab that using the link in the description. And listen, it is a very, very powerful approach to learning that will help you frame your mind so much better when you are being taught live, not just always watching videos. And along those lines, this is, to me, something that I wish I had known sooner. Franklin used a lot of metaphors, and one of the metaphors that he used was very, very powerful. It was the idea of society either being a bound rope or cord, or it could be the frayed ends. And those frayed filaments, if they're not woven together, then they're just going to get more and more frayed, more and more scattered. And what I really like about that is the idea of the mental metaphor can drive you. So whether it's a mental metaphor that you use to describe the situation that you're trying to solve, or a mental metaphor that you use to help yourself navigate through life better, it really, really works. There's a lot of research on it. I won't bog you down with the science right now. I've talked about it a lot before on the channel. But at the end of the day, it is an incredibly powerful thing to do. So all of these skills stack together, but writing is the most important of all when it's combined with well thought out mental metaphors that help you create your unifying vision of what it is you want to do. And it can empower you, because there is a thing in the science called predictive processing. And more we see in the research that we do create the reality based on how we think about it. So one of my most empowering metaphors, you've probably heard it before, is the magnetic memory method. The idea that the magnet attracts what I want to remember, but it also repels the distractions. So I keep focused on the information that actually improves my life. And so Franklin has inspired me for years. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into, just some of the wealth that you'll find when you learn about Franklin yourself. But more habits abound that I've learned from people like Thomas Jefferson. So if you want to learn more about Jefferson's study habits and how he learned very, very deeply, stick around and go through my video or podcast on Thomas Jefferson's deep learning secrets next.